I've been thinking about this topic for a while. I wanted to write about it, and I pitched the idea to a editor, and she didn't respond. But when you look around at how the world is trying to do mitigation as a global goal for global warming targets, lots of progress, Paris Agreement, lots of good things, revised nationally determined contributions, and so on, and you feel very good about what's happening. Then you look around at the cost of climate change. I will show some figures. And then you think about all the defense, the militaries. Every country in the world wants to have a military, and even the poorest of the poor want to be ready with guns and stand on the wall, ready for come what may. Make sense. But something new is also happening as we want critical minerals and nickel, cobalt, lithium, etc. Countries are moving aggressively to corner the markets or the resources by sometimes, it's a modern day colonization of resources in other countries. And how will military be used to manage markets for these minerals? Will they be helping with global goals of adaptation, mitigation? Because electric vehicles need lots of these critical minerals, and if one country gets a president who is not thinking properly and another country which has the resources, is it going to sit and say, okay, you can have all the minerals, or is it going to try to control the markets by controlling the minerals? So this is very complicated, but my simple question is it possible at all that climate action in its full 360 view and sustainability, as much as you can imagine it, can it really happen without world peace? Will militaries ever be part of the climate action as a whole, or will they always be the barriers to going beyond a certain limit? So this is some philosophical question. So I wanted to just think about it in terms of the numbers and say that we actually need science for peace. We are pushing forward a lot with very crazy messages about how the world may be coming to an end, which I'm not a big fan of, because the kids of today need more optimistic vision for the future. And if world peace can be part of the climate solution, then hey, that's what's more optimistic than that. So let's start by comparing the military carbon footprint on a global scale. This is from this militaryemissions.org, and the message is simple. If the world's militaries were a country, it would have the fourth highest carbon footprint. So you have Japan, Russia, then militaries come in, India, United States, and China, of course, dominates now. So we are always thinking about how much emission comes from wars, from military activities, drills, equipments, flying around, everything, training and infrastructure, etc. But what about just this expenditure to keep the militaries ready and so on? So let's first look briefly at the global costs of extreme weather that are attributable to climate change. Climate will cause hazards even without us, always has. But now we are amplifying the extreme events and causing damages that are additional to natural variability. So we can think of extreme weather that are attributable to climate change. It's not an easy job, but nonetheless we need to have some sense. Extreme weather events lead to significant adverse social costs. Extreme event attribution, a methodology that examines how anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions had changed the occurrence of specific extreme weather events, allows us to quantify the climate change induced component of these costs. So there are methodologies involved in estimating these. You can quibble about it, but it's good to have an estimate. We collect the data from all available EEA studies, that is extreme event attribution studies. There are some issues with those. I have written about it elsewhere. You can follow up. We combine these data on socioeconomic costs of these events and extrapolate for missing data to arrive at an estimate of the global costs of extreme weather attributable to climate change in the last 20 years. We find that US dollars 143 billion per year of the costs of extreme events is attributable to climate change. The majority, or 63% of this, is due to human loss of life. How do you put a cost on human life? That's always tricky as well, but World Bank provides us an estimate, as we'll see. Our results suggest that the frequently cited estimates of the economic costs of climate change arrived at by using integrated assessment models may be substantially underestimated. Well, integrated assessment models are used also for the IPCC climate scenario reports, assessment reports, and I have discussed them elsewhere. You can follow up on my channel, but idea is that integrated assessment models are kind of designed for these kind of calculations going into the future. What are the choices on energy, defense, sustainability, etc., what it means in terms of emissions, and then those are fed to the climate models to produce future projections of climate, etc. But just to stay brief here, climate change attributed loss of life and damages from extreme weather events. Globally aggregated, of course, you're going from 2000 to 2019, so climate attributed loss of life and damages and total loss of life and damages. So obviously total losses are higher, and you have the attributable loss, which used to be small, jumped up in certain years. 2003, I think, was the massive heat wave that killed maybe 75,000 or so in Europe. 2008 financial crisis, and then there were other, these are climate extreme events. So you can see that the numbers here look lower than other years, but if you take a long enough time series, you can find the trends in these things. But we have to keep these numbers anyway, and there are various data sources used here, and there are color codes there that I'm not being very careful about, but I just want to give you an idea that we have estimates of these, and the numbers add up to some $16 million per day according to the, I think, International Energy Agency. So how are the losses distributed? So obviously value for loss of life and economic damage from extreme weather events: low income, lower middle income, upper middle income, and high income. So damages and loss of life. Of course, rich countries have assets in the path of extremes, so their losses will be higher, but you have to be careful about the proportional losses. So you can look at that in terms of gross, fraction of GDPs. So here, high-income countries have a very low fraction of GDPs, resulting in losses from extreme events. Upper middle-income classes, you can figure out why that's lower, but again, that often relates to how many valuable assets you have in the path of climate hazards. Lower middle-income countries jumps already 0.6 or more attributable loss of life and damages, and you can see loss of life is disproportionately high in lower middle income and low income countries, and then you are adding some damages on top because they have not that many assets. They don't have that many assets, but loss of life is high. So obviously climate change created by high income countries in terms of cumulative carbon, and then prices being paid by lower middle income and low income countries. Okay, so keep that in mind, and then let's jump to some estimates of the trends in world's military expenditure, and then we'll also look at exports just to get a indication. I'm just putting these together because the cost of climate change looks like high, but if you compare to the military expenditures, often it's not that high, and you can translate that to cost of climate action for mitigation and adaptation, and how hard it is for countries to put up that money, especially in terms of mainstreaming those adaptation and mitigations into the budget, fiscal policy, etc., so funding can be sustained. So this is from CIPRI, which is a non-governmental independent international institute dedicated to research into conflicts, armaments, and so on. World military expenditures increased for the 9th consecutive year in 2023, reaching a total of $2,443 billion. Okay, let's just jump to figures because these numbers are nicely seen in the figures. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Military expenditure constant 2022 US dollar as the baseline for billions of dollars here. So 1988, we are, oops, did I cut out? Yeah, here. Americas, Asia and Oceania, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So as I said, poor countries are not immune from the need to have militaries. Nobody trusts anybody anymore, or never did, I guess. But now it's got serious implications in terms of the expenditures involved. So expenditures have generally gone up. There was a dip for whatever reason. I'm not going into details. There was a flattening, and then it's going up again. Is this ever going to come down, or will it keep going up? And so you have to think about emissions from militaries and the resources taken away by the military, because they pretty much have a big line item in the budget of any country, and they are not always an open, transparent system in terms of seeing what's happening with the money or where it's all going. But that's a separate issue. The key facts then: world military expenditure driven by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and heightened geopolitical tensions rose by 6.8% in real terms. I even adjusted for inflation to 2,443 billion in 2023, the highest level ever recorded by SIPRI. In 2023, military spending increased in all 5 geographical regions for the first time since 2009. Those are the 5 regions we mentioned. The total military expenditure accounted for 2.3% of the global domestic product in 2023. Again, distribution matters in terms of high income and low income countries. So nonetheless, you get a sense of how much money is being spent by all the countries on military. The 5 biggest spenders in 2023 were the United States, China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia. Okay, imagine, which together accounted for 61% of the world's military spending. So majority is just coming from these, and we'll look at the export numbers as well. The USA and China remain the top 2 biggest spenders in the world, and both increased their military spending in 2023. US spending was $916 billion, while Chinese spending was an estimated $296 billion, but proportion of GDP has to be looked at as well, which we will do. Russian military spending grew by 24% in 2023 to an estimated $109 billion. This was equivalent to 5.9% of Russia's GDP, a significant fraction of GDP, and you can compare it to other things Russia spends on, like let's say agricultural research, climate adaptation, mitigation, and you know that Russia is not a big part of the climate action overall. Ukraine became the 8th largest military spender in 2023, increasing its spending by 51% to $64.8 billion, or 37% of GDP. In 2023, military expenditure by NATO member states reached $1,341 billion, or 55% of world spending. So what is NATO going to do? What's its future? You know, some issues are going on with the current president of the US. 11 of the 31 NATO members in 2023 met NATO's 2% of GDP military spending target, which was 4 more than in 2022. The number of countries jumped up in terms of increased funding for the military as 2% of the GDP NATO agreement, and some president is unhappy that not all countries are spending that much, but the countries argue that no sir, we are. So the share of world's military expenditure of the 15 countries with the highest spending, US dominates, China comes in next, and then you have Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, of course, UK, Germany, Ukraine, France, Japan. But so basically, even the countries which are most progressive on climate action, like let's say Germany and UK, they are obviously spending significant amounts on military as well, and we are not clearly thinking about what does it mean. Does all the military spending conflict with our climate goals and climate action at country level as well as global level? This equation is very complicated, and yet we are not even paying attention to it. So here is the change in military expenditure change from, I think, 2019 to 2023, but it doesn't matter. The world has gone up almost 7%. North Africa has gone up by 38%. 28%. What is there in North Africa? Basically poor countries. Sub-Saharan Africa, poor countries. Central America and the Caribbean has gone down by a tiny bit. North America, of course, has gone up. South America is down, Central Asia is down, East Asia is up, and of course Eastern Europe is up 31%, Middle East is up 9%, and India doesn't show up here, but I'm sure India and China these are done by region, so India will be in South Asia, Pakistan and India are big spenders, and East Asia will be Japan and China, I suspect, which is significant as well. Okay, so NATO and the push for further increase in military expenditure. I won't go into this because this is a very evolving situation with the elections after this report was written. So let's not spend too much time on it. But in 2014, NATO members agreed that by 2024 they would allocate 20% or more of their total annual military spending to procuring major equipment. So the military-industrial complex is a massive part of the economy, right? People sell, buy weapons, and that's what they call major equipment. A total of 28 NATO members met the target in 2023, up from 7 in 2014, so more purchases. Between 2014 and 2023, NATO members' average share of military spending dedicated to major equipment more than doubled to reach 28%. Folks, we are talking about serious numbers. So how do the countries do? Of course, rich countries spend a bigger fraction of the GDP, but even middle income country, let's say like India, is spending 20 to 30%, whereas China is doing better at 10 to 20%, but of course its GDP is much higher as well. And you can see North Africa here. Why are they spending so much? You can go and try to figure that out. Okay, so this is Saudi Arabia here and Algeria here. For whatever reason they may feel insecure, and there is Ukraine, which is spending more than 90% of its GDP on defending itself and trying to stay alive, and it's also getting a lot of aid from Europe and US, while US is now teetering, but nonetheless. Let's just look at the trends then in arms transfers. Again, just look at the figures. The volume of international transfers of major arms in 2019 to 23 was 3.3% lower than in 2014 to 18 period, and 3.3% higher than in 2009 to 13. So whatever the reason was for the dip, it was trended up since on a longer time scale anyway, which is expected to continue, I'm sure. The 5 largest exporters were the United States, France, Russia, China and Germany. Arms exports by the USA went up by 17% between 2014 to 18 and 2019 to 2023, while those by Russia went down by 53% because Russia is using its weapons for itself, I'm sure. France's exports rose by 47%, and it moved just ahead of Russia to become the world's second largest arms exporter. Nobody talks more on climate action and so on than France. Macron is going around talking nice things, but 47% increase in military arms export. The 5 largest arms importers in 2019 to 23 were India, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Ukraine and Pakistan. So India and Pakistan are arming themselves to the teeth to defend themselves against each other. And imagine if they just made a peace agreement. How much money would go into other things like climate action, climate adaptation. States in Asia and Oceania accounted for 37% of all arms imports in 2019 to 2023, followed by states in the Middle East, Europe and the Americas, and of course Africa. Arms imports by states in Europe were 94% higher in 2019 to 2023 than in 2014 to 2018, and now we have to also see, with the NATO perturbations from the US, what will happen to spending in Europe overall. A total of 55% of European arms imports came from the USA in 2019 to 23, compared with 35% in 2014 to 18, but this also may change because countries may be trusting US less for various things, various reasons. The largest importer in Europe was Ukraine, which received 23% of the region's total arms imports in 2019 to 2023. Imagine if Putin decided that world peace is more fun than wars, then what would happen? Volume of arms transfers, then you can see there was a dip and a scale back up. There are, of course, geopolitical issues involved and why these trends are there, but nonetheless, I would only point to the fraction of the amount of money spent, billions of trend indicator values. So obviously, world peace will move lots of these things into climate action and a brighter future, sustainability, sustainable development, equity, justice, my God. So here is global share of exports of major arms by 10 largest exporters over 2019 to 2023. US, you expect. France has gone up, and Russia still remains a giant. China, of course, there, and India should be here, but it doesn't. I guess it went into others, but I know that India is still quite a large exporter. Change in volume of exports of major arms since 2014 to 18 by the 10 largest exporters in 2019 to 2023. Change in volume of arms exports, so that's negative here, and this is the increase. So US up 17% over 2019 to 2023. France up 47%, Russia down minus 53, but it's bombing the hell out of Ukraine and creating all kinds of market perturbations and overall degradation of climate action. China is down, Germany down 14%, Italy up 86%. Volume change in volume of arms export. UK down, Spain down, Israel down, and Israel also has been engaged in a war, and South Korea went up. So everybody is in this game. Nobody is innocent. Global share of imports of major arms by the 10 largest importers. So you have India massive here, Pakistan 4.3% change. So global share in Pakistan 4.3%, India almost 10%, China about 3%, but depends on how much they are manufacturing themselves and what it is that they are buying. Countries like Australia don't produce a lot of arms, so they keep buying. Japan may be similar. Ukraine, of course, needs lots of weapons. And India builds a lot, exports a lot, but imports a lot as well. Often it's to make the big daddies happy by buying fighter planes from US or France and so on and so forth. So all kind of geopolitical calculations are involved. The importers of major arms by region 2019 to 2023 and 2014 to 2018% of global share. So here Asia and Oceania at 30%, Middle East at 30%, and Europe at 21%. So this is a very volatile region. Everybody wants to arm themselves. This also, I don't know what's going on there, but you can look it up. Asia, Oceania went down actually compared to the previous 5-year period. Middle East also went down, but that hardly matters in terms of, the total spending may have gone up even if the fraction of the importers, their total purchase may have gone down. Okay, so I'm just emphasizing the numbers here because the message is still that we are just spending incredible amount of money on militaries, and it's not showing any downward trend. It may not ever show a downward trend, but the other idea is, other than all the greenhouse gases they emit, what do these military do in terms of helping or hurting climate action, like the transfer of critical minerals, materials across boundaries, global markets. Some strange perturbations happen. Putin invades Ukraine, turns off the gas valve. Europe panics, starts burning some more coal, or imports a lot of gas from Norway and US. Norway and US get richer, and climate action takes a backseat overall, right? So that war is still going on. We don't know what's happening. Then the exciting election results of the US have put a monkey wrench into everything. Massive perturbation, not just to climate action, but even weather and climate prediction business. So most of the things don't make sense, but we must somehow build all these things into our climate action plans. Do these scenarios for the future include these things? Not really. If you look, they are a bit naive in terms of energy, resources, transportation policies, and so on. So world peace, inevitable for real sustainability, I think. But how do we get there? I don't know, but at least I can say that it's very critical and we need it. Okay? Leave it there.